Yes, so I'm also very happy to be here. Thank you, Simonetta, for a great speak. I think you and me have a lot of the same thoughts, as you will see. I've been working for the past now almost 8 years in the Mr. Future Fashion project, and I will talk about some results from that. And I'm very happy to be part now in this produktdesign, produktion and teknik of the national platform. Yeah, so this is almost the same picture. I think we are starting to realize what climate impact really is. And I think it's time for Mr. Trump to say, look what happened last summer in Sweden. Because look what happened. It's called the fire summer. Some people call the summer of 2018 that. And what also happened was that a glacier in Jämtland, it's called Syllarna, it collapsed. And this actually got my mother thinking, because she had been there skiing when she was young. And she usually, you know, she's a bit skeptical. She thinks my work is boring and stuff. But when she saw this and she realized that what she could do in her generation will not be possible for her grandchildren, then she has started to ask a lot about climate change. And from a researcher perspective, I see that there is a lot more action, less storytelling, less talking, as Simonetta also says. We want proof, we want the truth, we want trust. So it's all about like measuring and percentages. So the UN Fashion Charter for Climate Change has actually set measurable targets. We need to reduce 30% to 2030 of the climate change. And I think that this is a sign of the time that what is measured is improved, and we have to start measuring. So the agenda for 2030 involves 17 different sustainability targets. I was sort of enlightened a few years ago when I read in the local newspaper, Göteborgs-Posten, that we had that UN had made 17 new climate goals. And I thought like, you know, it's for me it's so obvious that it's 17 sustainability goals, and one of them is a climate goal. But obviously, sustainability, climate, environmental impact, it's not easy to see the difference when we speak about it as a whole. So climate impact, that's the global warming. That's only that, or it's a very large question, of course. But it's not about poison, it's not about child labor, it's not about water depletion. It's only the global warming, or only, but maybe our biggest threat. So, you know, the globe is like a greenhouse, and all the emissions, the climate gases, they work as the glass in a greenhouse. So they let through the high energy sun rays down to the earth. But when the sun rays bounces on the earth, on the surface, they lose energy, and then they go back and they bounce again on the wall, on the glass wall. So the greenhouse is real, sort of. It's not glass walls around the earth, but it's a wall of carbon dioxide and methane. So slowly, just as a greenhouse, it's getting warmer and warmer, and the more greenhouse gases, the more climate emissions we emit, the thicker is this glass wall. And some scientists published in Science, which is a sort of high-ranked publication, that actually for every ton of carbon dioxide we emit, and the average Swedish person emits 11 tons a year, but for every ton that we emit, we lose 3 square meters of ice in the Arctic. So 33 square meters of ice each year is lost in the Arctic for each of us. So fortunately there's a lot of ice in the Arctic, but for year 2050, the prognosis is that there will be no summer ice. So the Arctic will not be a continent anymore, it will be a sea. So my children are now 11 around, but when they have children, in their school book, the Arctic will not be a continent. They will see in their geography that it's a sea. So it will be different in the future, definitely. Now this maybe stopped working or something. So what do? We need to get climate neutral, and then we need to see that 90% of the climate impact is caused by fossil fuels. And fossil means that we bring it out from the Earth's crust. So bio-based, for example, means that it's something that's circular, that's turning and returning to the Earth, while fossil means something that we add all the time, add to the atmosphere. So 90% is caused by fossil fuels. And if we look at this picture, you see the green, that's oil, the natural gas, that's red, and the coal is gray, and the blue, that's hydropower, and the orange is nuclear power. And there's a little bit of like dark orange here, which is renewable fuels. But last year, we had an increase of use of fossil fuel that was higher than the increase of use in renewables. So we're increasing our use of fossil fuels. And when I think about it, this is very personal, but who has the power on the Earth? It's the oil and gas industry, right? And who will reduce 30% of their production to year 2030? Will Saudi Arabia, for climate issues, reduce their production of fossil fuel with 30%? That's a lot. Will US do that? Will the Russians do that? Will the Chinese stop producing fossil fuels due to climate sort of conscience or something? No, I think that it's the demand that has to be reduced. I think the supply will continue. They will want to sell their fossil fuels. That's why they, start oil wars. So what do we do? That's the reason why I work with life cycle assessment, because I want us to sort of focus on the big things that makes change or maybe transformation. The sad thing with this picture is that it's an old sketch drawing where there's a person flying in an airplane, and he asks, "Excuse me, is this plastic spoon recyclable?" Maybe that's not the big question. Maybe the big question is that he's sitting in this airplane and there are glaciers melting behind him. And when this picture was sketched, we didn't have the real pictures as we have now. But life cycle assessment can help us calculate what will make a big effect and what will make a small effect. And that's why I think it's very useful. And I have been fortunate to do this in the Ministry of Fashion project for 8 years almost now. It's a very big investment. We had 11 million euros, and also a cross-disciplinary team, because I think no one can sort of just solve the environmental problems of the textile industry. I think we need consumer behaviorists, we need policy scientists, we need economics, and so on, to find these solutions that will lead us to a systemic change, which I now think should be a systemic transformation. So life cycle assessment, I think many of you know it, so I will just sort of go through it very fast, but you look at the whole life cycle, because you cannot fail anywhere. You cannot fail at the fiber production, you cannot spend a lot of energy in the yarn spinning, you cannot make all your workers deaf because they don't have earplugs when they work, you cannot have a lot of carcinogenic dye stuffs in the wet treatment, you cannot, cut away 50% lost in the cutting. If you produce a lot of stuff that you don't sell in the retail, then you also fail. If you never use the garments more than once, you fail. And if you throw your synthetic garments in the ocean after using them, there will be a lot of microplastics. And life cycle assessment is also broad in terms of environmental impacts, because we have climate change, but we also have the other impacts like toxic substances, water depletion. So it's a way of sort of catching the holistic picture here. And what we saw in this Mr. Future Fashion study is that for climate change, the major part of the climate impact is caused by the garment production. So from when we have the fibers, and then we start spinning yarn, weaving, knitting, dyeing, making garments, all these processes, they stand for 56% of the climate impact, more or less. And this is something that we talk very scarcely about. We talk a lot about fiber production, we talk a lot about washing temperature, or we did at least in 2011 when Mr. Future Fashion started. I think it's been a change now that we have talked less about what temperature we wash in, and we talk a lot about the disposal. For water use, then we see that the fiber production is everything, I would say. And this everything is also only cotton. So if we look at the sort of a global scarcity-weighted water use, we find that cotton fibers, as they are today, are not sustainable. For ecotoxicity, it's again the garment production, and then it's the dyeing and finishing, of course, that is the main culprit. Now it started working better. And sometimes the pictures are very detailed and complicated, and sometimes I think that the pictures are not so complicated. Because if we look at fibers, what are they really? We can say that they are just like food. They are fat, sugar, and proteins. So fat, oil, synthetic-based fibers. We have plants then, like cotton, flax, that gives us cellulosic fibers, and also wood that gives us cellulosic fibers, which is the sugar. And then we have protein fibers like wool and silk. And when there's a lot of talk about the new sustainable fiber coming and sort of making the whole textile industry green by using, now I'm saying orange peel fibers because that's one of the latest marketing. They are very good in marketing, but when we look at them, it's still, regenerated fibers. So I think we have made a thorough study of all the available data that we can find, the environmental data about fibers. And what we see is that there are some exceptions. For example, wool and silk, the protein fibers, they are different. But if we look at all the other fibers, if we produce 1 kilogram of any fiber, we see that they are around, I would say, 2.5 kilograms of carbon dioxide. And 2.5 kilograms of carbon dioxide, that is exactly the amount that you get if you burn 1 liter of petrol. So when we take our car and drive, for every liter of petrol, we produce 2.5 kilograms of carbon dioxide. So we can say that all the fibers, they have a climate impact around 1 liter of petrol. And what we also see is that the difference between different suppliers and different studies, of course, this one is bigger. The difference between suppliers is bigger than the difference between the fibers. So instead of talking about is polyamide better than polyester, is wool better than viscose, I think we have to look at the suppliers. Which supplier has the best production facility, the most efficient energy use, and the best sources? So that's the conclusion that we have made in this fiber Bible that many of you maybe heard Gustav Sandin talk about at the Textildialogen. And there is one exception, I would say, of the fibers, and that's due to the water use of conventional cotton. So when we look at the water picture, we also see that, well, it's same for most of the fibers, but cotton, that's really high water use we have in the irrigation of cotton. However, this is today. I think many of you have heard about the Aral Sea in the former Soviet Union when they started industrial production of cotton. The Aral Sea was used as a water source. And in 1989 it was a big sea with a lot of fishing and transporting. And then all the water was consumed for irrigation of cotton and it almost disappeared. But now it's increased from 30 meters to 42 the last years because a lot of dams are being built. So perhaps in the future cotton might be okay. I mean, it's not as we are developing a lot of new fibers, but the cotton is also improving. So who knows if cotton will still be that culprit in the future. We can hope that also cotton is being improved. Another thing is the last thing about fibers, but I think that we talk a lot about ecological or environmentally friendly garments. And why is this garment friendly? Well, it's made from organic cotton. And many companies have this sort of marketing that all our sustainable products, they're made from organic cotton. But then a couple of years ago, there was this PhD thesis where I actually forgot her name, but she made a thesis on finding carcinogenic dye stuff in organic cotton. And for all people who sort of are in the textile industry, I mean, we know that dye stuffs are very different from organic cotton. So why should you not be able to find carcinogenic dye stuff in an organic cotton garment? But people were very surprised. And it was a big media thing, actually, that she had found carcinogenic dye stuff in organic cotton, because the consumers thought that, it would be safe. So in a way, I think she did a very valuable contribution finding these carcinogenic dye stuff in organic cotton garments out in the stores. But it's not all about fibers. It's a lot about toxic, and it's a lot about when we want to improve the production, we should definitely see that our production sites have wastewater treatment. Not every wastewater treatment is turned on either. I'd like to speak a little bit about microplastics, because I think that's something that's highlighted a lot. So, I mean, what will be the end of the world? Will it be the climate impacts, or will it be all the chemicals that makes us infertile, for example, or will it be microplastic that kills us? There's this environmental monitoring in most countries, and in the Baltic Sea, they have water samples and fish samples, like stored, conserved, from 1985 and forward. And you see the content of microplastics, it's the same. So we don't have an increase in the Baltic Sea or the Baltic Sea of microplastics, in fact. And I think still there is a problem with microplastics, especially the ones that carries chemicals. But many people are afraid of plastics as they are. But I think that we all should know that plastic particles, they are not toxic. So there is no particle effect from microplastics. I think we should I want you all to know that. But if there are hazardous chemicals in the microplastics, then, and we inhale them, or the fish eat them or something, then there might be a toxic effect. But the problem is still the toxic chemicals. The problem isn't really the microplastics. So I will skip a little bit of this and just go to one of the most important conclusions. That when we look at environmental impact, I think that this is a brilliant equation. It's some people think it's very similar or simple, but it's from 1972, and these old people are still current, I think. They say that the total environmental impact can be expressed as the environmental impact per product, like what technology are we using, times the number of products per person, so how much we consume, times how many we are. And in 2100, they predict us to be 11 billion people on the Earth, and many hope that that will be the tip of the curve. And from my own point of view, I mean, you can have one-child politics as in China, but maybe female education is a better option. So for you who have production and buy stuff in developing countries, I think doing these social projects with female education is very important, because if all women in the world get their first child at maybe 30 instead of 15, we can all have as many children as we want, and still not have the population growing in the same pace. So if yes, I'm so finished. If we have our first child at 15 and that child has her first child at 15, then the population is growing as it is today very fast. But I think we make a good division into having a production focus and a consumption focus. Yeah. Because sometimes I think we talk about so many things at the same time, and I think that we need to do both. And for me, my vision at least, or the vision that we are trying to spread and also in the Swedish Textile Climate Initiative, is that today we have a consumption, and the small ones are the ones that are sort of best available technology. They are really good producers. And then we have some producers that are really bad. That's why this area is so big. So the area represents sort of the environmental impact. So I think that in 2030, we will have a little less consumption per person. So if you count them, you will see that the squares are fewer here than here. But the big change, I think, will have to be in the technology, so that we skip these that are really bad, that produce very little value for very much environmental impact. And we only keep sort of the best of the producers. Less volumes of textile produced per capita. Those that are produced are done so with much less impact. And if we raise the quality of garments, then we can sell them with higher revenue at the first selling point, and at the second, and at the third. So we need to still keep up the revenues, right? But selling less garments. Yes, that was all.